The chandeliers glowed, the champagne still fizzed, and then it happened. In front of hundreds of cameras and the city's most powerful names, Isabella Harrington, the billionaire CEO everyone called untouchable, stumbled at the podium, her hands trembling, her breath vanishing. Gasps cut through the ballroom as whispers turned to a roar. Was the empire about to collapse with her? And then, out of the shadows, a man in work boots and a faded jacket rushed forward. Not a bodyguard. Not a shareholder. Just a single dad with grease-stained hands and a daughter waiting at home. What he did next silenced every voice in that glittering room and exposed a truth that would change both of their lives forever. Rain threaded down the glass walls of the Harrington Hotel like silver stitches, muting the laughter that had spilled out of the ballroom only minutes earlier. Guests had dispersed after the shareholder meeting, some triumphant, some grim, but the building still hummed with the echo of deals struck and ambitions wounded. On the 12th floor terrace, where lanterns flickered against the mist, Isabella Harrington sat alone at a marble table. The world knew her as the youngest CEO of a global conglomerate, the woman who wore diamonds like armor and delivered quarterly reports with surgical precision. But here, under the watery glow of the terrace lights, her shoulders sagged, her mascara bled faintly at the corners of her eyes, and her fingers trembled as she tried to keep her breath steady. She pressed a linen napkin to her mouth, but it did nothing to hide the silent sob that shook through her. David Miller almost walked past her. He wasn't supposed to be there long. His night shift was simple. Run maintenance checks in the banquet halls, keep an eye on the service elevators, and if lucky, finish in time to get a few hours of rest before waking his daughter for school. He smelled faintly of soap and machine oil, the lingering perfume of a day spent at the small garage he ran in the city's West End. Tonight, the Harrington Hotel was just another job that kept the lights on. But as he turned toward the exit, he saw her, a woman alone, rich silk dress clinging to her like armor that had begun to split. He recognized the posture of someone holding back more than she could contain. He hesitated. A billionaire crying was not his business. But the echo of a small voice, his daughter Lily's voice, rippled through him. "Daddy, you always help people, even strangers." He sighed, adjusted the strap of the battered tool bag slung across his shoulder, and stepped closer. "Miss, are you all right?" His voice was quiet, careful not to startle her. Her head lifted, and for a moment their worlds collided in silence. Her eyes were storm gray, glassy with tears, and he realized with a jolt that this was Isabella Harrington, a woman whose face he had seen in newspapers and billboards, usually flanked by headlines about mergers or lawsuits. She looked nothing like the ice figure from the press photos. She looked human. "I'm fine," she said quickly, the kind of reflexive dismissal that came from years of being watched. Her voice cracked on the last word. David nodded slowly, not pressing. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and produced a small square of fabric faded blue with uneven stitches along the edges. He set it gently on the table between them. "My daughter insists I carry one," he said. "She says there are more tears in the world than people admit." Isabella blinked at the object. It was absurdly out of place here among marble and gold. A child's handkerchief, clumsily embroidered with a flower and the name Lily in crooked letters. Her manicured fingers hesitated before picking it up. The fabric was soft from many washes, and the little flower looked like it had been sewn with stubborn love, not skill. For the first time in months, Isabella felt something in her chest ease a weight she hadn't realized she was suffocating under. "Thank you," she whispered. David shrugged, but there was a steadiness in his presence that reached past words. He didn't ask why she was crying, didn't angle for recognition or favors. He just stood there, a man in work clothes with rain misting his dark hair, offering silence instead of intrusion. She noticed the bag slung over his shoulder, a corner of a first aid kit peeking out. His hands, resting calmly on the chair back, were rough, the kind of hands that fixed what was broken. A vibration startled her phone, buzzing on the table. Messages from board members stacked on the screen. Criticisms disguised as concern. Reminders of votes looming. She silenced it with a sharp tap, shame burning her throat at being caught so undone. But when she looked up, David wasn't smirking or judgmental. He looked almost protective. "I should get back," he said softly, stepping away to give her back her solitude. He didn't wait for a reply. His footsteps faded down the corridor, steady and unhurried. Left alone, Isabella unfolded the little handkerchief again. Her tears had stained one corner darker. She traced the crooked letters with a fingertip, the child's name stitched in stubborn thread. The ballroom beyond her still smelled faintly of champagne and ambition, but here, in the quiet, she felt the echo of a stranger's kindness linger like a fragile shield. She closed her eyes, pressed the handkerchief to her lips, and allowed herself a single unguarded thought. Why would a man like that carry something so small, yet offer it so freely? For the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone. The following afternoon, the rain had thinned into a gray drizzle that glossed the city streets. Isabella Harrington, who usually traveled with a driver and a security detail, arrived instead at a quiet strip of shops on the west side. She pulled her luxury sedan into the narrow space outside a faded garage wedged between a bakery and a pawn shop. A crooked sign above the rolling door read Miller's Auto Repair. She told herself it was coincidence, that the car had felt sluggish, that she might as well have it checked. But the truth pressed more deeply. She wanted to see the man who had handed her a child's handkerchief instead of pity. Inside, the scent of motor oil and fresh coffee mingled strangely. The garage was cluttered, but not careless. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, invoices pinned on a corkboard, and in one corner a makeshift desk built from an old door balanced on sawhorses. A little girl sat there, humming softly as she sketched with crayons. Her curls bounced as she leaned over her paper, tongue peeking between her lips in concentration. David emerged from under the hood of a rusted pickup, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He looked up, surprised but not flustered to see her. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. His voice carried no awe, no fear of her wealth, just a grounded steadiness. "My car has been acting up," Isabella replied, her tone sharper than intended. She hated how defensive she sounded. "I thought I'd get it checked," David nodded simply. "Pull it around back when you're ready." "I'll take a look." Then he gestured to the little girl. "That's my daughter, Lily." Lily lifted her head, her hazel eyes bright. "Hi," she chirped. "You're the lady from the hotel." Heat rushed to Isabella's cheeks. She hadn't realized the girl had noticed her. "Yes," Isabella said softly. "I suppose I was." "Daddy said you were sad," Lily continued matter-of-factly. She held up her drawing. "So I drew you something." The paper showed a towering glass castle with a figure sitting by a window. The woman's face was streaked with blue tears, and outside the castle gates stood a tiny girl holding out a flower. Isabella's breath caught. The crude strokes of crayon felt like a mirror pressed against her soul. "Lily," David said gently, "that's private." "It's okay," Isabella whispered. She crouched down, Armani skirt brushing the oil-stained floor, and studied the picture more closely. "It's beautiful," she told the child. Her throat tightened. "Why did you draw her crying?" "Because castles look pretty, but they're lonely," Lily said with the blunt honesty only a child could carry. "Sometimes people need a friend to fix the sad, not the castle." Isabella's composure faltered. She blinked rapidly, pretending to adjust her hair. No one had spoken to her like that since she was a girl herself. No spin, no angle, just truth. David cleared his throat, busying himself with tools. "Lily has an imagination," he said, though his eyes flicked toward Isabella with something gentler than apology. "I had a castle once," Isabella murmured, not realizing she had spoken aloud. "Not glass but stone. It was my father's house. It never felt like home." She rose slowly, pressing her hands together to steady herself. "My parents split when I was 9. After that, rooms were full but hearts were empty." The silence that followed was not awkward, but weighted. David set down the wrench he held, leaning against the workbench. "I know about empty rooms," he said quietly. "My wife Sarah, she passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. This garage became the roof over our heads. But it's Lily who keeps the lights on in my heart." Isabella's gaze shifted back to the girl, now adding stars above the castle. A child keeping her father's heart lit. It was a truth wealth had never purchased for her. Her eyes dropped to the ragged keychain hanging from David's belt. She noticed a laminated card attached, edges worn, lettering faded. DNAR. Do not attempt resuscitation. Per patient's request. He caught her glance and explained before she could ask. "Sarah made me promise to honor her choice," he said, voice roughened by memory. "The hardest thing I ever did was not try to fix what she didn't want fixed." The words struck Isabella harder than she expected. She understood contracts, obligations, the weight of signatures. But this was love forged through surrender, not control. Lily ran over, holding out a second picture. This one showed 3 figures standing under a small yellow house, smiles wide. "That's my real dream," she said proudly. "A place with laughter." Isabella accepted the paper with hands that trembled slightly. A laugh bubbled up, unsteady but real. "You're very talented," she told the girl, and for once the compliment wasn't a performance. When she finally excused herself, David held the door. She stepped out into the drizzle, clutching both the child's drawing and the memory of a faded handkerchief. For the first time in years, she felt the faint outline of something she had almost forgotten existed, the possibility of belonging. As her car door closed, Lily's words floated after her. "Sometimes people need a friend to fix the sad, not the castle." Isabella sat for a long time before starting the engine. The ballroom of the City Civic Center gleamed under chandeliers as hundreds of eyes turned toward the stage. It was meant to be a flawless evening, a charity gala where Isabella Harrington would unveil new initiatives for the Harrington Foundation, promising millions toward education and community programs. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters poised, shareholders mingling in the front rows. The air smelled faintly of roses and ambition. Isabella, in a tailored ivory gown, stood at the podium. Her voice carried steady for the first few lines of her speech, trained to sound assured even when the weight of a $5 billion empire pressed on her. But David, standing in the wings at her quiet request, noticed the subtle tremor in her hand, the faint pallor that makeup couldn't conceal. The evening had already been tense. Her communications director, a sharp-suited man named Richard Sloan, had pressured her backstage, insisting she stick to the prepared script. "You need to look invincible tonight," he warned. "No pauses, no weaknesses. The board will be watching." His words had the steel edge of a threat, not advice. Isabella had nodded, but something in her chest felt dangerously unsteady. Now halfway through the speech, it happened. Her breath faltered. A sheen of sweat glistened across her brow. She gripped the podium with both hands, her knuckles white. For a second she tried to push through, but her voice cracked on a simple word: hope. Her eyes glazed, knees buckling. A ripple of alarm swept through the audience. Cameras zoomed in, lenses hungry for humiliation. David reacted before anyone else moved. He was across the stage in seconds, catching her as her body sagged. "It's all right, I've got you," he murmured, his voice low enough that the microphones didn't catch it. He guided her into a chair just off stage, angling his broad shoulders to block the view of the press. Years of caring for his ailing wife had trained him to move with calm precision. He checked her pulse fast and erratic, then her breathing, shallow but present. "Arrhythmia," he muttered under his breath, pulling the small first aid kit from the side pouch of his tool bag. While Richard hovered, panicked and whispering about optics, David shot him a glare. "Block those cameras, now." His tone brooked no argument. A pair of assistants scrambled to pull a partition across the side of the stage, shielding Isabella from the lenses. "Look at me," David urged, crouching beside her. "Stay with me. Slow breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth." He steadied her trembling hands in his own rough palms, his voice an anchor in the storm. From his kit, he produced a small vial of medication he carried for emergencies, remnants of Sarah's illness, kept out of habit more than hope. He placed the pill carefully against Isabella's lips with a cup of water. She swallowed weakly, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. When her pulse steadied slightly, he kept talking, calm and steady, while his mind catalogued every symptom. This wasn't stress alone, it was something deeper, systemic, something she had lived with far longer than the cameras knew. "Tell me the truth," he said softly when the worst of the episode passed. "How long have you been fighting this?" Isabella closed her eyes. The facade that had carried her through boardrooms and interviews crumbled. "Since I was 18, she whispered. "It's a genetic condition, a heart defect. I've hidden it for years. If the shareholders knew, if the press knew, I'd lose everything." David absorbed the confession in silence, remembering the laminated DNA card that had hung from Sarah's keychain. He had once promised to honor her choice, even when it shattered his world. He understood what it meant to live under the shadow of fragility, to cling to dignity when the body betrayed. "You don't need to be invincible," he said finally. "You need to be human. The right people will stand with you in that." A sharp cough interrupted. Richard Sloane reappeared, face tight with frustration. "This cannot happen again. We'll spin it as exhaustion. But if you deviate from the script tomorrow, Isabella, the board will hear of it, and so will the press. You want to keep your empire? Then keep quiet about this." His gaze darted to David with disdain. "And keep the mechanic out of sight." David rose slowly, positioning himself between Isabella and the man in the suit. "She doesn't need spin," he said, his voice low but carrying. "She needs respect. If you can't give her that, step aside." Richard's jaw worked furiously, but Isabella raised a trembling hand. "Enough," she whispered. For the first time that evening, her eyes were clear. She looked at David, not Richard, and found in his expression something stronger than fear, the quiet promise of someone who would not let her collapse unseen. In that fragile moment, with her heart still unsteady and the weight of empire pressing in, Isabella realized she trusted him, not the man who wrote her speeches, not the shareholders demanding invincibility, but the widowed father with grease-stained hands who carried a first-aid kit like armor. And for the first time in her career, she considered telling the truth. The morning sun slanted through the tall glass windows of the Harrington Tower, but the boardroom felt colder than winter. 12 directors sat around the mahogany table, their expressions carved from suspicion and polished disdain. Screens behind them blared headlines from the night before. CEO collapses at Gala Foundation in question. Photos of Isabella slumped on stage flashed in endless rotation. Richard Sloane stood near the end of the table, voice smooth as silk and just as cutting. "Exhaustion," he said. "That's the official line. We've drafted a statement emphasizing Miss Harrington's tireless commitment to the company. Any deviation will only fuel speculation. For the sake of shareholder confidence, she must remain silent." Isabella sat rigid at the head of the table, her ivory blouse buttoned high, her diamond watch gleaming. Inside, her heart still thudded unevenly. Every instinct screamed to follow the script, to cling to control. Yet when she glanced toward the doorway, she caught sight of David leaning casually against the frame, invited at her insistence. His presence steadied her, like an anchor. She remembered his words. "You don't need to be invincible. You need to be human." By noon, the press conference had begun. Cameras clicked, microphones thrust forward, reporters jostling for angles. The room buzzed with anticipation of another spectacle. Isabella stepped to the podium, the script Richard had prepared folded neatly in her hand. She looked down at it for a long moment, then folded it once more and set it aside. A ripple of confusion surged through the audience. "My name is Isabella Harrington," she began, her voice calm though her hands trembled. "For years I have stood before you presenting numbers, profits, and projections. But today, I stand before you as a woman with a truth I can no longer hide." A murmur swept the room. She drew a steadying breath. "Since I was 18, I have lived with a genetic heart condition. It is unpredictable, sometimes frightening, and yes, it is the reason you saw me falter last night." Gasps echoed, followed by the frantic scratching of pens. Richard Sloane shifted in the corner, fury tightening his jaw. One board member buried his face in his hands, but Isabella pressed on. "I have hidden this condition because I was taught that weakness has no place in leadership. That to admit humanity was to admit failure. But I believe the opposite. True leadership is not about invincibility. It is about honesty, accountability, and the courage to stand in the light." She gestured to a file laid out beside her. "And speaking of accountability, we have discovered irregularities in the Harrington Foundation's accounts funds, redirected without authorization. An independent audit will begin immediately. I will not ask the public to trust us without showing we are willing to be transparent, even when it costs us comfort." Her gaze flicked to Sloane, whose face flushed crimson. "Those responsible will be removed." The room erupted in questions, but she lifted a hand. "I will not entertain spin or speculation. What I will do is commit resources not only to education, but also to research and support for families battling rare diseases, because I know what that battle feels like." In the back, David stepped forward. For a moment, the camera swung toward him, curious about the man who seemed out of place among silk ties and polished marble. His voice carried warm and steady. "I'm not a shareholder, not a board member. I'm a father. And what I saw last night wasn't weakness. It was courage. My wife fought an illness she didn't survive. She made me promise to respect her choices, even when it broke my heart. Mrs. Harrington is making a similar choice today, choosing truth over appearances. That deserves respect, not shame." The silence that followed was profound. Even the clicking shutters slowed. One reporter lowered her microphone, as if realizing this moment required listening more than probing. Isabella's shoulders straightened, and a quiet strength radiated from her. Later that evening, headlines told a different story. CEO reveals illness wins praise for honesty. Transparency over spin. Investors rally. Richard Sloane was dismissed within days, his leaked emails confirming attempts to manipulate public narrative. For the first time in years, Isabella felt relief instead of dread when opening the morning paper. Back at the modest Miller garage, David sat at the kitchen table with Lily perched on his knee. He played an old voicemail, his wife's voice crackling through the speaker. "If you ever get the chance to love again, David, don't let fear stop you. Lily deserves to see you happy." He swallowed hard, eyes burning. Isabella stood in the doorway, watching the scene with a softness that didn't belong to a CEO, but to a woman on the edge of choosing a different life. And for the first time, she thought, perhaps she had found not just an ally, but a home waiting in the unlikeliest place. The weeks after the press conference carried a different rhythm. Headlines no longer speculated on collapse, but praised courage. The Harrington Foundation officially launched a new branch called Home is Here, dedicated to supporting single parents and funding research for rare diseases. The name caught fire in the media, but to David it was simply the phrase Isabella had whispered one night when she stood in his kitchen, watching Lily trace stars and glow-in-the-dark stickers on the ceiling. "Home is here," she had said softly, as though testing the weight of the words. The foundation's inaugural event was smaller, held not in a hotel ballroom, but in a refurbished community center. Instead of chandeliers, paper lanterns glowed. Instead of speeches crafted for shareholders, Families spoke about their battles with medical bills and midnight fears. Isabella, in a simple navy dress, sat among them rather than apart. When she spoke, she did not hide her condition. "Illness does not diminish dignity," she told the crowd. "It clarifies it. And families, whether whole, broken, or rebuilt, deserve the tools to keep their lights on." Her voice trembled, but this time with conviction, not fear. Afterward, she followed David and Lily back to their modest home on the city's edge. The small house smelled faintly of coffee and sawdust. Lily had left her crayons scattered across the table, half-finished sketches of sunlit houses and smiling stick figures. Isabella slipped off her heels, startling herself with how natural it felt. She joined David in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with the uncertain rhythm of someone unaccustomed to ordinary tasks. He watched her fingers clumsy against the knife and smiled gently, covering her hand with his. "Not every cut has to be perfect," he murmured. "It just has to feed someone." The moment deepened when Lily bounded in, clutching a folded piece of paper. "I made something," she announced, handing it to Isabella. It was written in blocky letters across ruled notebook paper. "Application to be your daughter full-time." Beneath, a list of requirements: nightly story time, hugs when she felt sad, someone to cheer at her school play. At the bottom, Lily had drawn 3 stick figures holding hands under a roof, a crook heart above them. Isabella's eyes blurred as she pressed the paper to her chest. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I don't want to take your mother's place." "You can't," Lily replied with the matter-of-fact certainty of children. "But you can be here, that's enough." David swallowed hard. He had replayed his late wife's voicemail too many nights to count. The one where Sarah's fading voice told him, "Give your heart permission to love again when Lily needs it." Now, watching his daughter's wide eyes and Isabella's trembling hands, he felt the weight of that promise shift into fulfillment. That evening, Isabella presented Lily with a gift, the same handkerchief she had been given weeks earlier, now washed, stitched with new threads. This time, the crooked flower had been outlined carefully, and below Lily's name was an added line of embroidery: "Home is here." Lily squealed with delight, clutching it to her cheek. David met Isabella's gaze across the table, something unspoken passing between them: gratitude, trust, the tentative beginnings of love not born of rescue but of belonging. Saturdays at the garage began to change. With Isabella's quiet funding, David opened the bay doors for free workshops. Single parents learning how to check tire pressure, jumpstart a dead battery, even stock a basic first aid kit. Children played nearby, chalking the pavement with bright suns and crooked castles. Isabella often sat cross-legged among them, listening as if she'd never had that chance before. She no longer looked like a CEO guarding a throne. She looked like a woman finally part of a family. One evening as dusk fell, the porch light outside David's house flickered on. The 3 of them stood together on the small stoop, Lily in the middle, her hands tucked into theirs. From the street, the silhouette was ordinary, almost forgettable: a man, a woman, a child framed by warm light. But inside, Isabella noticed a new drawing taped to the refrigerator. No glass castle, no lonely figure. Just a yellow house, a garden out front, 3 smiling faces, and a single phrase scrawled above in Lily's uneven handwriting: "Home is here." For Isabella, it was worth more than any empire. For David, it was the promise he had once thought impossible. And for Lily, it was simply the truth. Some broken things, when fixed with patience and love, become stronger than they ever were before. Some stories aren't about empires saved or fortunes rebuilt. They're about the quiet victories of the heart. Isabella discovered that power was never measured in boardrooms, but in the warmth of a porch light left on. David learned that fixing what's broken sometimes means opening your hands, not tightening your grip. And little Lily proved that even the smallest voices can redraw the shape of a family. Together, they stitched something stronger than wealth, something more enduring than fear: a home. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Don't forget to subscribe to Soul Stirring Tales for more stories of love, resilience, and family, and leave a comment below. What does home mean to you?